The restaurant fell silent as the little girl's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Sit with me," 6-year-old Isabella Rossetti said, her small hand reaching for the humiliated waitress. "My daddy says mean people aren't welcome here." Every eye in Rossetti's turned toward the corner table where Brad Morrison had just finished destroying Larissa Santos with his cruel words about her accent, her clothes, her obvious desperation. The Brazilian waitress sat frozen, tears threatening to spill, as the most powerful man in Chicago slowly rose from his reserved booth. Domenico Rossetti's presence commanded immediate attention. The expensive suit, the dangerous calm in his dark eyes, the way every person in the restaurant suddenly found their plates fascinating. But it was his daughter's innocent declaration that would change everything. "Minha filha falou," Domenico said, his voice low and deadly. "My daughter has spoken. You can leave now." Brad's face went white as he realized who he'd just embarrassed in front of. But Larissa didn't know she was about to enter a world where kindness came with a price, and protection meant belonging to the most dangerous man in the city. Welcome to Passion and Power. Tonight's story will take you into the dangerous world of Chicago's Italian Mafia, where a single act of kindness changes everything. Comment below where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button. Your support means the world to us and helps us bring you more incredible stories like this one. 3 hours earlier, Larissa Santos had been optimistic about her blind date. Her co-worker Sophia had insisted that Brad Morrison was perfect, successful, handsome, and looking for something serious. What Sophia hadn't mentioned was that Brad was also a snob who would take one look at Larissa's discount dress and immediately write her off. "This is the place?" Brad's voice dripped with disdain as they approached Rossetti's, the upscale Italian restaurant in downtown Chicago. "I thought we were going somewhere nicer." Larissa's stomach dropped. She'd chosen Rossetti's because she worked there and could get a small discount, but now she realized her mistake. To Brad, this wasn't impressive. It was probably where he brought clients, not dates. The hostess, Maria, gave Larissa a sympathetic look as she seated them at a table near the kitchen. Not the romantic booth Larissa had hoped for, but at least they were inside on this cold February evening. "So," Brad said, not bothering to look at the menu, "Sophia tells me you're from Brazil. How long have you been here illegally?" The question hit like a slap. "I'm not—" "Come on, sweetheart. The accent, the job, the desperation in your eyes, it's obvious." He leaned back, studying her like a specimen. "I'm in real estate. I can spot someone living in the shadows from a mile away." Larissa's hands trembled as she reached for her water glass. She'd been in Chicago for 8 months, her tourist visa long expired, sending every penny she could back to her family in São Paulo. Her mother's last letter had been about the rent increase, her younger brother needing school supplies. The constant struggle to keep their heads above water. "I work hard," she said quietly. "I don't ask for handouts." "Right." Brad's laugh was cruel. "Look, I agreed to this because Sophia said you were pretty, but honestly, I don't date down. Way down." From across the restaurant, Domenico Rossetti watched the scene unfold with growing irritation. He'd been having dinner with his daughter Isabella, their weekly tradition since his wife's death 2 years ago. But his attention kept drifting to the table where the Brazilian waitress, Larissa, he'd learned her name from overhearing staff conversations, was being systematically humiliated. He'd noticed Larissa before. She was different from the other servers who flirted shamelessly, hoping to catch his attention. She was professional, efficient, and treated every customer with the same quiet dignity. Even when drunk businessmen made crude comments or demanding socialites snapped their fingers at her, she never lost her composure. "Daddy, why is that man being mean to Larissa?" Isabella asked, her 6-year-old voice carrying clearly in the quiet restaurant. Domenico's jaw tightened. His daughter had somehow formed an attachment to the Brazilian waitress, always asking if the pretty lady with the nice smile was working when they came for dinner. Isabella had lost her mother to cancer, and she'd been withdrawn ever since, until recently when she'd started brightening whenever Larissa served their table. "Some people don't know how to treat others with respect, Principessa," he said, his voice carefully controlled. Back at the other table, Brad was just getting started. "I mean, what's your end game here? Find some desperate American guy to marry you for papers? Because let me save you some time, that's not happening with me. Larissa stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. I think I should go. Oh, come on, don't be dramatic. Brad grabbed her wrist, his grip tight enough to hurt. Sit down. We haven't even ordered yet. That's when Isabella Rossetti decided she'd heard enough. The little girl slipped away from her father's table before Domenico could stop her, marching over to where Brad still held Larissa's wrist. Her dark curls bounced with each determined step, her pink dress a splash of color in the dimly lit restaurant. Let her go, Isabella said, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd never been told no. You're being mean. Brad looked down at the child in confusion. Kid, this is none of your business. Go back to your parents. Sit with me, Isabella said to Larissa, completely ignoring Brad. My daddy says mean people aren't welcome here. The restaurant fell silent. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Silverware paused halfway to mouths. Even the kitchen staff peered through the service window to see what was happening. Domenico rose from his booth, his movement fluid and predatory. He was tall, imposing, with the kind of presence that made people step aside without thinking. His white shirt was open at the collar, revealing the strong column of his throat, and his dark eyes held a coldness that made Brad's blood freeze. Minha filha falou, Domenico said, his accented English carrying easily across the silent restaurant. My daughter has spoken. You can leave, now. Brad's face went from red to white in seconds. He might not have known exactly who Domenico Rossetti was, but he could read the signs, the deference of the staff, the fear in other customers' eyes, the way even the air seemed to thicken with danger. Look, I don't want any trouble, Brad stammered, releasing Larissa's wrist so quickly she stumbled backward. Then you shouldn't have caused any, Domenico replied. He didn't raise his voice, didn't move closer, but somehow his presence filled the entire space. Leave. Don't come back. Brad threw money on the table and practically ran for the exit, not even looking back at Larissa. Isabella tugged on Larissa's hand. Please, I'm eating alone and Daddy is always working. Larissa looked between the little girl and the man who'd just terrified her date into fleeing. She should leave, should go home to her tiny studio apartment and pretend this night never happened. But Isabella's hopeful expression reminded her of her own niece back in Brazil, and she found herself nodding. Just for a few minutes, she said softly. As they walked toward Domenico's booth, Larissa felt every eye in the restaurant following them. She didn't know she was about to sit down with the most powerful crime boss in Chicago. She didn't know that this simple act of kindness toward his daughter would put her directly in the crosshairs of a world she never imagined. All she knew was that a little girl had stood up for her when no one else would, and sometimes that was enough to change everything. The booth felt like another world, rich leather seats, pristine white tablecloth, and a view of the entire restaurant that somehow felt both protective and exposed. Larissa perched on the edge of the seat, acutely aware that she didn't belong here. I'm Isabella, the little girl announced, settling beside her with the confidence of someone who owned the place. What's your name? Larissa, she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. That's pretty, like a princess name. Isabella beamed, then looked at her father expectantly. Daddy, aren't you going to say hello? Domenico studied Larissa with those dark, unreadable eyes. Up close, she could see the sharp angles of his face, the way his jaw tensed slightly as he considered his words. There was something dangerous about him, something that made her pulse quicken with a mixture of fear and something else she didn't want to examine. Larissa, he said, and her name sounded different in his deep voice, the syllables rolling with a slight Italian accent. I apologize for what happened. That man was out of line. You didn't have to, she started. Yes, I did. His tone brooked no argument. No one disrespects a woman in my restaurant. His restaurant. The words hit her like a revelation. She'd been working here for 3 months and never realized the owner was this young, this intimidating. You own Rossetti's? She asked. Among other things. His smile was slight, revealing nothing. You work here. It wasn't a question. Of course he knew. He probably knew everything about his employees. Larissa wondered what else he knew about her precarious situation, her expired visa, her constant fear of deportation. I do, she confirmed. I should probably get back to— It's your night off, Isabella interrupted. Sophia told me when I asked where you were. She said you had a date. The little girl wrinkled her nose. He was gross. Despite everything, Larissa found herself smiling. Yeah, he was. Why did you go out with him? Isabella asked with the blunt curiosity of childhood. Larissa glanced at Domenico, unsure how much to reveal. Sometimes we hope people will surprise us, in a good way or a bad way. Good way, but sometimes we're wrong. Domenico signaled to a waiter who appeared instantly. Bring the lady whatever she'd like to eat. Oh, I couldn't. You came here for dinner, he said simply. You should eat. The waiter looked at her expectantly, and Larissa realized she was trapped between politeness and pride. Her stomach was empty. She'd been too nervous to eat all day, but accepting charity from her boss felt wrong. The pasta special is very good, Isabella offered helpfully. Daddy says our chef makes the best carbonara in Chicago. Our chef? Larissa looked between them. Isabella considers herself part of the restaurant family, Domenico explained, and for the first time, his expression softened slightly when he looked at his daughter. She's been coming here since she could walk. Mama used to bring me, Isabella said matter-of-factly, but she's in heaven now, so it's just me and Daddy. The simple statement hit Larissa like a punch to the chest. This little girl had lost her mother, and her father, this powerful, dangerous man, was raising her alone. Suddenly, the protective way he'd handled Brad made more sense. I'm sorry, Larissa said softly. Isabella shrugged with the resilience of a child who'd learned to accept loss. It's okay. Daddy takes good care of me. Don't you, Daddy? I try, Domenico said, his voice rough around the edges. The waiter was still waiting, and Larissa finally gave in. The carbonara sounds perfect. As the waiter left, Isabella launched into a stream of chatter about school, her friends, and her opinions on everything, from the restaurant's new dessert menu to why purple was obviously the best color. Larissa found herself relaxing, despite the surreal situation, drawn in by the little girl's infectious energy. Do you have kids? Isabella asked during a brief pause. No, Larissa said. But I have a little brother back in Brazil. He's about your age. Do you miss him? The question was innocent, but it cut deep. Every day. Domenico had been quiet during most of Isabella's chatter, but now he leaned forward slightly. How long since you've seen your family? 8 months. The words came out before she could stop them. I came here to work, to send money home. My family. We don't have much. She immediately regretted the admission. The last thing she needed was her boss knowing how desperate she was, how precarious her situation had become. That's very brave, Isabella said seriously, leaving your family to help them, like a superhero. Larissa's eyes filled with unexpected tears. I don't feel very brave most of the time. Brave people never do, Domenico said quietly. That's what makes them brave. Their eyes met across the table, and Larissa felt something shift in the air between them. There was understanding there, recognition of shared struggles she didn't fully comprehend. But before she could analyze it further, her carbonara arrived, and Isabella immediately began critiquing the presentation. Chef Marco always puts too much pepper, she declared. I keep telling him, but he says I have baby taste buds. Maybe you do, Larissa teased, taking a bite. The pasta was incredible, rich, creamy, perfectly seasoned, despite Isabella's protests. I do not. Daddy, tell her I don't have baby taste buds. Your taste buds are very sophisticated, Domenico assured her, but his eyes remained on Larissa. How is it? Amazing, she said honestly. Best I've ever had. Better than in Brazil. Different, but yes, better. They talked through the meal, or rather, Isabella talked, while Domenico listened, and Larissa found herself gradually relaxing. The little girl was charming, funny, and clearly adored by her father despite his serious demeanor. Watching them together, Larissa could see glimpses of the man beneath the intimidating exterior. When Isabella excused herself to use the restroom, Larissa and Domenico were left alone for the first time. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken questions. Thank you, Larissa said finally. For what you did earlier. You didn't have to get involved. Yes, I did. His voice was firm. And not just because Isabella likes you. Why then? He studied her for a long moment. Because you deserve better than men like him. The simple statement sent warmth flooding through her chest. You don't know me. I know enough. His dark eyes held hers. I know you work double shifts without complaint. I know you're kind to difficult customers. I know you send money to your family even when you can barely afford rent. Larissa's breath caught. How do you... I pay attention to my employees, he said, especially the ones who matter. Before she could ask what that meant, Isabella returned, chattering about the fancy soap in the bathroom. But Larissa's mind was spinning. There had been something in Domenico's voice, in the way he looked at her, that suggested this dinner was about more than his daughter's kindness. As the evening wound down, Larissa realized she'd been in the restaurant for over 2 hours, the longest she'd ever spent anywhere without working, without worrying about money or visas or the constant fear that defined her daily life. Can Larissa come to dinner again? Isabella asked as they prepared to leave. If she wants to, Domenico said, his eyes finding Larissa's again. The invitation hung in the air between them, loaded with possibility and danger in equal measure. Larissa knew she should say no, should thank them politely and return to her safe, invisible life. Instead, she heard herself saying, I'd like that. She had no idea she'd just accepted an invitation into a world where kindness came with a price, and where falling for the wrong man could cost her everything. 2 weeks later, Larissa found herself looking forward to Thursday evenings with an anticipation that both thrilled and terrified her. It had become their routine. Isabella would appear at her station during the dinner rush, asking if she was free for family dinner with the kind of hopeful expression that made saying no impossible. Tonight was different, though. Tonight, Domenico had asked her to come earlier, before the restaurant opened to the public. I have something to discuss with you, he'd said during their last dinner together, his voice carefully neutral. But there had been something in his eyes that made her pulse quicken. Now, standing outside Rossetti's at 5 o'clock, Larissa smoothed her simple black dress and tried to calm her nerves. Through the window, she could see Domenico moving through the empty dining room, checking tables with the precision of a man who demanded perfection in everything. He looked up as she approached the door, and their eyes met through the glass. Even from a distance, she felt the impact of his gaze like a physical touch. He moved to unlock the door, and she caught the scent of his cologne as he stepped aside to let her in, something expensive and masculine that made her think of dark nights and dangerous promises. Where's Isabella? She asked, suddenly aware they were alone. With her nonna, he said, locking the door behind her. My mother took her shopping for new school clothes. The restaurant felt different, empty, larger somehow, but also more intimate. Without the bustle of customers and staff, every sound seemed amplified. Their footsteps on the hardwood floor, the soft jazz playing from hidden speakers, the whisper of her dress against her legs as she walked. You wanted to discuss something, she prompted, trying to ignore the way her heart was racing. Sit, he said, gesturing to their usual booth. Please. She slid into the familiar seat, watching as he moved to the bar. His movements were economical, graceful in a way that suggested controlled power. When he returned with 2 glasses of wine, she noticed his hands, strong, elegant, with a thin scar across his knuckles that spoke of a violent past. I have a proposition for you, he said, settling across from her. Larissa's stomach dropped. She'd heard propositions before from wealthy men who thought her desperation made her available. Mr. Rossetti, Domenico, he corrected, and it's not what you're thinking. You don't know what I'm thinking. And your face is very expressive. His slight smile took the sting out of the observation. You're wondering if I'm about to proposition you the way other men have. The answer is no. Heat flooded her cheeks. I didn't... Isabella needs a tutor, he continued as if she hadn't spoken. Someone to help with her English homework, maybe teach her some Portuguese. She's been asking about Brazil ever since she met you. Larissa blinked, thrown by the unexpected direction. A tutor. 3 evenings a week. Here, after the restaurant closes, I'll pay you what you make in a full week of shifts. The offer was generous. Too generous. Why? Because my daughter likes you. Because she's been happier these past 2 weeks than she's been since her mother died. Because, he paused, his dark eyes searching her face, because I trust you with the most important thing in my life. The simple honesty in his voice made her chest tight. I'm not qualified to be a tutor. You're patient with her. You listen when she talks. You make her laugh. He leaned forward slightly. Those are the only qualifications that matter. Larissa stared down at her wine, mind racing. The money would solve her immediate problems: rent, groceries, maybe even enough to send extra home to her family. But something about the offer felt dangerous, like stepping onto a bridge she couldn't see the end of. There's something else, Domenico said quietly. She looked up to find him watching her with an intensity that made her breath catch. I know about your visa situation. The words hit like ice water. Larissa's hands went cold, and she had to set down her wine glass before she dropped it. I don't know what you mean. Larissa. Her name was a gentle reprimand. I told you I pay attention to my employees, especially the ones who matter. Are you going to report me? The question came out as a whisper. No. His voice was firm, absolute. But I can help. How? I have connections, people who owe me favors. Your situation could be resolved. The offer hung between them, too good to be true and therefore terrifying. What would you want in return? Nothing you're not willing to give. The careful phrasing sent a shiver down her spine. That's not an answer. It's the only answer I can give you right now. He reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers. I'm not asking you to trust me blindly. I'm asking you to let me help. His touch was warm, calloused, and sent electricity shooting up her arm. She should pull away, should maintain the professional distance that had kept her safe for months. Instead, she found herself turning her hand palm up, letting his fingers intertwine with hers. Why? She asked. Why would you help me? Because Isabella needs stability. Because you deserve better than living in fear. Because... He paused, his thumb tracing across her knuckles. Because I've been watching you for months, and I've never seen you be anything but kind, hardworking, and genuine. That's rare in my world. His world. There it was again. That hint of something darker beneath the surface. Larissa had heard whispers among the staff, rumors about the Rossetti family's real business, speculation about why certain customers were treated with such deference, theories about the men in expensive suits who sometimes met with Domenico in the private dining room. What exactly is your world? She asked, his hand stilled on hers. Are you sure you want to know? The question was loaded with warning, with the promise that some knowledge couldn't be unknown. Larissa thought about her precarious situation, her expired visa, her family's needs back home. She thought about Isabella's bright smile and the way Domenico looked at his daughter like she was his entire universe. Maybe not yet, she said finally. Relief flickered across his features. The tutoring job. Will you consider it? She should say no. Every instinct screamed that accepting would complicate her life in ways she couldn't imagine. But the money, the chance to help Isabella, the way Domenico was looking at her like she mattered. Yes, she heard herself say, I'll do it. His smile was slow, transforming his entire face. Good. But I have conditions. Name them. I want to know what I'm getting into. Not everything, she added quickly, seeing his expression tighten. But if this affects Isabella's safety or mine, I need to know. Fair enough. He squeezed her hand gently. Anything else? If I say stop, if I want out, you let me go. No questions, no consequences. Agreed. The ease of his acceptance should have been reassuring, but something in his eyes suggested he didn't believe she'd ever want to leave. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, as they sat in the empty restaurant with their hands linked across the table, Larissa felt like she was exactly where she was supposed to be. She had no idea that across town, Victor Kozlov was already planning how to use Domenico Rossetti's new weakness against him. The tutoring sessions became the highlight of Larissa's week. Isabella was a bright, curious student who absorbed Portuguese phrases like a sponge and peppered their lessons with questions about Brazil that made Larissa homesick and proud in equal measure. Tell me about Carnival again, Isabella demanded one Thursday evening, abandoning her math homework in favor of more interesting topics. We already talked about Carnival last week, Larissa laughed. But she launched into another description of the colorful parades, the music, the dancing that went on for days. Isabella listened with rapt attention, occasionally asking Domenico to translate words she didn't understand. He'd taken to staying during the tutoring sessions, claiming he needed to work on restaurant business, but clearly enjoying watching his daughter's enthusiasm. Sometimes Larissa caught him staring at her, with an expression she couldn't quite read. Intense, almost possessive, but tender in a way that made her pulse quicken. "Can we go to Brazil sometime?" Isabella asked. "For Carnival." "Maybe when you're older," Domenico said diplomatically. "That's what adults say when they mean no," Isabella grumbled, but she returned to her homework without further protest. As the weeks passed, Larissa found herself looking forward to more than just Isabella's company. Domenico had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard, and when he smiled, really smiled, not the polite expression he wore for customers, it transformed his entire face. She began to understand why Isabella adored him so completely, but there were moments that reminded her of the darkness in his world. The way conversations stopped when certain men entered the restaurant, the deference in people's voices when they spoke to him, the night she'd seen him through the kitchen window, speaking in rapid Italian to a man whose face was a map of old violence. "You're thinking too hard," Domenico said one evening after Isabella had gone home with his mother. They were alone in the restaurant again, sharing a bottle of wine as they often did after tutoring sessions. It had become their routine. Isabella would leave, and they would talk. About books, about travel, about everything except the growing tension between them. "Am I?" Larissa asked, swirling the wine in her glass. "So you get this little line right here," he said, reaching across to touch the space between her eyebrows, "when you're worried about something." His touch was gentle, but it sent heat racing through her veins. They'd been dancing around this attraction for weeks, the air between them growing thicker with each passing evening. "Maybe I have reason to worry," she said softly. "About what?" "About this. About you, about what I'm getting myself into." Domenico's hand moved to cup her cheek, his thumb tracing her jawline. "And what do you think you're getting into?" "I don't know. That's the problem." "Would it help if I told you?" Larissa leaned into his touch despite herself. "Would you, really?" "Some of it. The parts that matter." "Tell me." He was quiet for so long she thought he'd changed his mind. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. "My family has been in Chicago for 3 generations. We run legitimate businesses, restaurants, construction, import, export, but we also provide services that others can't or won't." "What kind of services?" "Protection, problem-solving, justice when the law fails." The euphemisms hung in the air between them. Larissa wasn't naive. She understood what he was really saying. "You're talking about the Mafia. I'm talking about family, about loyalty, about taking care of the people who matter. And the people who don't matter." His eyes hardened slightly. "They learn to stay out of our way." Larissa should have been terrified, should have pulled away, made her excuses and run back to her safe, invisible life. Instead, she found herself asking, "And me, do I matter?" "More than you know." The admission hung between them, loaded with promise and danger. Domenico leaned closer, his hand still cradling her face, and Larissa felt herself drawn into his orbit like a moth to flame. "This is crazy," she whispered. "Yes," he agreed, his lips inches from hers. "It is." When he kissed her, it was with a gentleness that surprised her, soft, questioning, giving her every opportunity to pull away. Instead, she found herself kissing him back, her hands fisting in his shirt as weeks of suppressed attraction finally found an outlet. The kiss deepened, grew urgent, and Larissa felt herself melting against him. This was dangerous, reckless, everything she'd sworn to avoid. But when Domenico's arms came around her, when he whispered her name like a prayer, she couldn't bring herself to care. They broke apart when air became necessary, both breathing hard. Domenico rested his forehead against hers, his dark eyes searching her face. "Stay," he said quietly. The single word carried the weight of 1,000 promises. Stay for the night, stay in his life, Stay despite the danger, despite the complications, despite every rational reason to run. Domenico, I know what I'm asking. I know what I'm offering isn't normal, isn't safe. But I can protect you, Larissa. I can give you everything you need. What if what I need is a normal life? Do you? Really? The question hit deeper than she expected. Did she want normal? A safe job, a predictable routine, a man who brought her flowers and worried about mortgage payments? Or did she want this, the intensity in Domenico's eyes, the way he made her feel like she was the center of his universe, the promise of a life lived on the edge of something extraordinary? Before she could answer, the front door of the restaurant exploded inward. 3 men in dark clothing burst through, guns drawn, moving with military precision. Domenico reacted instantly, pushing Larissa behind him as he reached for something under the table. "Victor sends his regards," the lead man said in accented English. "Russian," Larissa realized with growing terror. "Tell Victor he's making a mistake," Domenico replied, his voice deadly calm despite the gun pointed at his chest. "The only mistake was thinking you'd learned your lesson." The Russian's eyes found Larissa cowering behind Domenico. "But I see you've found new motivation to cooperate." "She has nothing to do with this. She has everything to do with this. Victor knows about your little pet, knows how much she means to you." Larissa's blood turned to ice. They'd been watching, waiting, learning her routines. She wasn't just a witness to this confrontation. She was the reason for it. "What does Victor want?" Domenico asked. "The shipment you intercepted last month, and your territory on the south side." "Not happening." The Russian smiled, cold and predatory. "Then your girlfriend comes with us. Insurance?" "You understand." "Over my dead body." "That can be arranged." The standoff stretched taut as a wire. Larissa could feel Domenico's tension, could see the calculation in his eyes as he weighed options. She realized with crystal clarity that people were about to die, and it was because of her. "Wait," she said, stepping out from behind Domenico despite his sharp command to stay back. "I'll go with you." "No." Domenico's voice was absolute. "Absolutely not." "It's okay," she said, meeting his eyes. "It's okay." But it wasn't okay. Nothing about this was okay. As the Russians moved to take her, as Domenico's face went white with rage and fear, Larissa realized she'd fallen in love with a man whose world could destroy her. And now it was about to. The warehouse smelled of rust and fear. Larissa sat tied to a chair in the center of the cavernous space, her wrists raw from the rope, her mind racing with terror and regret. How had she been so naive? How had she let herself believe she could touch Domenico's world without being burned? Victor Kozlov circled her like a predator, his pale eyes cold as winter. He was younger than she'd expected, maybe 40, with the kind of lean build that suggested violence was a tool he used often and well. "You know what I find interesting about Domenico Rossetti?" he said conversationally, as if they were discussing the weather. "For all his reputation, all his power, he has one weakness. He loves too deeply." Larissa said nothing. They'd been through this for hours. Victor's monologues about Domenico's supposed weaknesses, his plans for taking over the Italian family's territory, his certainty that love made men vulnerable. She'd stopped responding, stopped giving him the satisfaction of her fear. His wife was the same way. Beautiful, innocent, completely unprepared for what loving a man like him would cost her. That got a reaction. Larissa's head snapped up, meeting Victor's satisfied smile. "Oh yes, I knew Maria, sweet woman. Shame about the cancer, but these things happen. Stress can be such a killer, can't it?" The implication hit like a physical blow. "You're lying." "Am I?" Maria Rossetti developed a very aggressive form of breast cancer, just months after I began pressuring Domenico's business interests. Coincidence? Perhaps. But stress does weaken the immune system so dramatically. Larissa felt sick. If Victor was telling the truth, if his harassment had contributed to Isabella's mother's death. "And now here you are," Victor continued. "Another innocent woman caught in Domenico's web, history repeating itself." "He'll come for me," Larissa said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "I'm counting on it. The question is, what will he sacrifice to get you back? His territory, his business, his life?" Before Larissa could respond, the warehouse lights went out. In the sudden darkness, chaos erupted, shouts in Russian, the sound of running feet, the distinctive crack of gunfire. Larissa threw herself sideways, chair and all, hitting the concrete floor hard enough to see stars. Emergency lighting flickered on, casting everything in hellish red. Through the maze of shipping containers and machinery, she could see muzzle flashes, shadows moving with deadly purpose. The Russians were shouting orders, trying to regroup, but they were clearly outmaneuvered. A figure emerged from the shadows near her position. Tall, dark, moving with lethal grace. Domenico. He reached her in 3 strides, his knife making quick work of her bonds. "Are you hurt?" His hands were gentle as they checked her for injuries, but his eyes were pure murder. "No, I'm okay. Domenico," Victor said, "later." He pulled her to her feet, shielding her body with his, as another burst of gunfire echoed through the warehouse. "We need to move, now." They ran through the maze of containers, Domenico's hand firm on her back, guiding her toward what she hoped was an exit. Behind them, the sounds of battle continued. Victor's men were putting up a fight, but they were clearly losing. "This way," Domenico whispered, pulling her toward a side door. They almost made it. Victor appeared from behind a container, gun trained on Larissa's chest. His face was bloody, his expensive suit torn, but his eyes held the fanatical gleam of a man with nothing left to lose. "How touching," he snarled. The great Domenico Rossetti risking everything for his little whore. Domenico stepped in front of Larissa, his own weapon appearing in his hand with practiced ease. "Let her go, Victor. This is between us." "No, it's not. It stopped being between us the moment you chose her over good business sense." "I chose her over you," Domenico corrected. "There's a difference." Victor's laugh was bitter. "Just like you chose Maria over common sense. Look how that ended." "You son of a bitch." Domenico's voice was deadly quiet. "You had nothing to do with Maria's death. Didn't I? All that stress, all that worry about what I might do to her, to Isabella. Cancer feeds on stress, Domenico. Everyone knows that." Larissa saw Domenico's hand tighten on his gun, saw the rage building behind his controlled facade. Victor was baiting him, trying to make him reckless. "You're lying," Domenico said, but there was a tremor in his voice that suggested Victor's words had found their mark. "Am I? Ask yourself, when did the symptoms start? Right after I began targeting your businesses. Right after I made it clear that everyone you loved was fair game." "Domenico, don't listen to him," Larissa said urgently. She could see the guilt eating at him, the way Victor's poison was taking root. "Smart girl," Victor sneered. "She knows a losing battle when she sees one, just like Maria did in the end." That was the final straw. Domenico moved with lightning speed, but Victor was ready for it. The 2 men grappled, their guns skittering across the concrete floor. They fought with the brutal efficiency of men who'd learned violence in the cradle, each trying to gain the killing advantage. Larissa scrambled for one of the fallen weapons, her hands shaking as she tried to figure out which end was which. She'd never held a gun before, never imagined she'd need to. Victor broke free first, diving for his weapon. He came up with it aimed at Domenico, who was still on the ground, momentarily stunned. "Goodbye, old friend," Victor said, his finger tightening on the trigger. Larissa didn't think. She raised the gun she'd grabbed and pulled the trigger. The recoil knocked her backward, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. Victor spun around, clutching his shoulder, his own weapon flying from his grasp. "You bitch!" he snarled, lunging toward her. Domenico was on his feet in an instant, catching Victor in a chokehold that ended the fight permanently. The Russian went limp, his body hitting the floor with a final thud. In the sudden silence, Larissa dropped the gun like it was on fire. Her hands were shaking, her whole body trembling with adrenaline and shock. "It's over," Domenico said, pulling her into his arms. "It's over, Bella. You're safe." "I killed him," she whispered against his chest. "No, you didn't. You wounded him. I killed him." His voice was matter-of-fact, as if discussing the weather. "You saved my life. I don't know how to." "Shh." His hands stroked her hair, his voice gentle despite the violence they'd just witnessed. "You did what you had to do. You protected us both." Sirens wailed in the distance. Police, ambulances, the cavalry arriving too late to matter. Domenico's men appeared from the shadows, efficient and silent, as they began cleaning up the scene. "What happens now?" Larissa asked. "Now we go home," Domenico said simply. "Victor's organization will scatter without him. The threat is over." "And us?" He pulled back to look at her, his dark eyes intense. "What do you want to happen with us?" It was the same question he'd asked in the restaurant before their world exploded into violence. But now, after everything they'd been through, the answer was clearer. "I want to stay," she said. "I want to be part of your life, part of Isabella's life. I want to stop running from who I am and what I feel, even knowing what my world involves, even after tonight, especially after tonight." She reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "You came for me. You risked everything to get me back. I would have risked more." His voice was rough with emotion. "I would have given him everything, my territory, my business, my life, to keep you safe." "Why?" "Because I love you." The words came out like a confession, raw and honest. "Because you're not just anyone, Larissa. You're everything." The declaration hung between them, more powerful than any weapon, more dangerous than any enemy. In the hellish red light of the warehouse, surrounded by the aftermath of violence, Larissa finally understood what it meant to belong to someone completely. "I love you too," she whispered, and kissed him like her life depended on it, because in Domenico's world it probably did. Years later, Larissa would look back on that night in the warehouse as the moment her real life began. Not the desperate, fearful existence she'd been living, but something rich and full and worth fighting for. The immigration lawyer Domenico hired was expensive but effective. Within 6 months, Larissa had a green card and a legitimate path to citizenship. Her family visited for the wedding, a small, intimate ceremony with Isabella as maid of honor, beaming in a pink dress that matched her flowers. Domenico kept his promise about protection, but more than that, he kept his promise about love. He loved her fiercely, completely, with the same intensity he brought to everything else in his life. And Larissa discovered that being loved by a dangerous man wasn't terrifying, it was liberating. Isabella thrived with a mother figure in her life again. She learned Portuguese with impressive speed and insisted on teaching her new baby brother both languages when he arrived 2 years later. The little boy had his father's dark eyes and his mother's gentle spirit, and Isabella declared him perfect but loud. The restaurant business expanded, grew more legitimate with each passing year. Domenico never fully left his old world behind. Some loyalties ran too deep, but he built something cleaner for his family's future. On quiet Thursday evenings, when the restaurant was closed and the children were asleep, Larissa and Domenico would sit in their old booth, sharing wine and remembering the night a little girl's kindness changed everything. "Sit with me," Isabella had said, and in doing so had given them all the family they'd been searching for. What an incredible journey of love, danger, and family. From a humiliating blind date to finding true love in the most unexpected place, Larissa and Domenico's story proves that sometimes the greatest risks lead to the greatest rewards. Did this story touch your heart? Share your thoughts in the comments below and subscribe for more passionate tales that will keep you on the edge of your seat.